I just wondered what you both hoped people would do in reaction to watching the film. Like as a viewer, what would people sort of come away from it and
Um,
do?
well, for me, I mean, I'm a stand-up comic, and I've said this a few times. I've been very lucky that I've been in constant work. My job, if you only lose your work if you're not funny, and I've managed to pull it off. So I haven't really been. The last time I signed to unemployment was probably in the late 70s, and it was the labor exchange, and it was a completely different thing. So doing this film was a big shock to me. I mean, I didn't know anything about sanctions. I didn't know anything. I mean, the first thing Ken got me to do before we started filming was fill in the 52-page form assessment form. And he said, fill that in, and I came back and I went, I can't do it again. I goes, this is just insane. And I'm quite an intelligent bloke, so I can just imagine if you're ill and you're sick, the worry and the stress that must put you through. So it was a big shock to me. So I was actually living Dan's life, if you like, because the way Kent works is you get a little bit of the script every day, so you don't know the story, so you're just going through. So for me personally, the film has actually made me more of a political activist, if you like, because I just think that what I've learned through going to the film, it shocked me. I mean, Dan could be your father, he could be your grandfather, your uncle. Katie could be your mum, your daughter or your sister. Ordinary people. So that's what shocked me. So so he's turned me into a protester now.
I think hope people. First thing, I hope people will think it's okay that it's true, and so thank you for that. But I think if you do think it's true, then in a way we share a responsibility, because what do we do? What do we do about it? And it's very difficult to avoid feeling that responsibility. I suppose that's what made us want to tell the story. It was a story we just, Paul and I and Rebecca, we just felt, we just have to tell this story because it's passing. We're pretending it's not happening. I mean, there were 1,100,000 food packages given out last year. 1,100,000. Over 400,000 of those went to kids. This winter, do we keep ourselves warm or do we eat? This is the reality. And so what do we do with the knowledge, really? I mean, it's a shared responsibility. What do you do when you leave the cinema? I don't know. I mean, it's, of course, I mean, we might get on to the tricky waters of politics later on, but it's difficult. It's difficult to avoid it, really, when you see it, when you see the fact that we accept food banks as part of our normal way of life. It's just accepted. It's not acceptable, is it really? It really isn't.
Okay, so I've got a question.
Yes, before I ask my question, just to congratulate you. What's so many things are brilliant. It's so specific in its truthfulness in terms of, the script, your direction and the brilliant work of the actors. I really do congratulate you. And it was also, following on from something you said earlier, this thing of portraying working class people in a positive light is so important because let's face it, in most mainstream drama, when working class characters, they tend to be a druggie or they're basically trouble with the law. So I think that is crucial. Just following on from what you were talking about, sorry to continue with the political waters, but I joined the Labour Party about, a year ago. And it's quite a minefield, the Labour Party. It really is. I'm of the perspective that the Labour Party has always been a united front in the sense that you've got people who believe in Parliament, and that's the way you move things forward. And of course, that's true. And then there is now, particularly now, this very energised, radical people who've had enough of the kind of politics we've had, particularly in the last 20 years. And I just wondered, from your perspective, as somebody who's very politicised and so on, and indeed Dave as well, someone who's coming maybe a bit newer to all this, that I just wonder whether you think that, because I'm someone, for example, that doesn't believe that we should be looking about deselecting MPs. I can understand the argument, but I want to forge a positive energy in the Labour Party. And there are MPs who are good people who want to change things in the right way, who are being bullied along. And I wondered how you felt about that particular perspective, whether you think that's a naive perspective or whether that is a way to go in terms of taking the Labour Party forward.
Deselection is always presented in the media as a threat. MPs are threatened with deselection. I look at it the other way and say the members have a right to choose their candidate, and that's a democratic right. And it is not a threat. And everybody, I mean, every time we make a film, we have to take the script to people who we want to back it and say, do you agree with it? Are you happy for us to do it? Everybody here, I'm sure, doesn't have a job for life. Everybody has has to have their work monitored. I think for an MP to want more than 5 years guarantee is not acceptable. It's not democratic. But also, in addition to that, you cannot get the change. You cannot get the public investment in jobs and industry. You cannot get a fully funded public health service. You cannot get council housing, again with public investment, if we don't win. And we can't win with 3/4 of the MPs constantly undermining the leadership. We can't do it. The only way the Labour Party can win and do these things is when the MPs support him. And that means a new set of MPs.
Can I ask a question about the humour in the film, because it's beautifully nuanced? How do you find, David, you as a comedian as well, how do you find that perfect balance between such a serious topic and wonderful humour that I think we're all grateful for?
I'm just a brilliant comedian. Well, you know, I think the humour's there because, you know, when there's, I mean, you just have to look at when hard times, you know, any sort of, that's what gets you through sometimes, you know, difficult situations, your humour. And you know, Paul Laverty wrote some nice bits of humour in there. And I think it was just, you know, the one thing, I mean, this is the first film I've ever done, and I remember the first day thinking, when I got it and I got on set, and I thought to myself, what have I done? What have I done? But being a stand-up comic, I'm used to getting, you know, I mean, you can get hostile crowds, and you can get so I'm used to just getting on with it. And because Paul had written such lovely little pieces of comedy, I think it was just my natural comic timing and natural comic ability, I think, and was able to sort of, you know, highlight those bits because you need that humour to show that Dan is human, you know? I mean, you know, that Dan is just an ordinary bloke. And at first, he thinks, of course this is going to be all right. So he has a bit of, so he can have a laugh, you know, the thing with the mouse and that. He just thinks, I'll get this sorted. And then as more time goes on, he realises he can't. And that's when he decides, you know, I've had enough of this now. I've got to make a direct action. That's why he does the spray paint thing, you know. And I think that's when he decides, you know, all right, I've had a bit of a laugh, but now I've got to do something, and I'll stay there till I get what I want, you know.
I was so moved. I had to go outside for 10 minutes to compose myself. I really did. And in case I forgot, I had to write it down. So I hope you forgive me if I read off my phone. So this is what I thought. And my question is not about politics or current affairs or anything like that. My question is this. What do you think it is that moves certain people to be so compassionate and so human when they see other people in distress? And conversely, what is it about other people that will, you know, refer to the man or, I can't remember what you called him, but the decision maker? That's my question to you.
It's a mixture of people defending what they see as their interests and our natural human reaction. Because I think our natural human reaction, for most, I think we just reach out a hand to help. You know, I think that's what we are. We are social creatures. You don't, if your neighbour's in trouble, you know, everybody pops in and gives a hand, and that's our common experience, and that's how we live together, and that's who we are. But I think that gets into conflict when there are economic interests at stake, and the economic interests lead us sadly back to bloody politics. And I wish it didn't. But
All roads
it-
end
it-
in
but it-
politics.
but it has to, because what are the interests what are they defending? I mean, but why don't we just give each other a hand? Because they have to defend a system in which, if that leads to poverty, it leads to mass unemployment, as we know. It needs to 5.5 million people underemployed. It needs to labour being cheap, because labour has to be cheap for this system to continue. So that means if labour's cheap and there's unemployed and people who can't survive, what the people in power have to prove that that's the fault of the poor. Because if it's not the fault of the poor, it's the fault of the system. And if it's the fault of the system, then they would have to change it. So poverty is the fault of the poor. The fact that Dan can't get a job is not to do with health, it's because he can't write a proper CV. That's the point. And so poverty is the fault of the poor. Homelessness is the fault of the people who aren't clever enough to get a house. And that's the key. And I think that's what we have to challenge. But it's a consciousness and it's an ideology. I mean, that's why the editors of the popular press don't have to be wicked and unpleasant. That's the interest they're defending. Force them to that line. Force them to attack immigrants. Force them, or to demean them, or to ignore them. You know, the people in the boats, the poor, God-forsaken people struggling to not drown as they cross the Mediterranean. People in Calais, you know, kids in Calais entitled to come, and yet the government will not facilitate it because they're afraid that others will come and the word will get out. Yes, you can get into Britain. So kids are forced to live in this horror and face traffickers and abuse because our government will not allow them to come in what is actually their legal right.